I wasn't supposed to be on that road that night. The highway had closed because of an accident, and the GPS rerouted me through a narrow mountain pass I'd never taken before. It was one of those December nights when the snow doesn't fall gently. It slams against the windshield in waves, forcing you to drive half blind. The wipers barely kept up. My phone showed no signal bars, and the temperature gauge on the dash had dropped to minus 14 degrees Celsius. The further I went, the emptier it got. No houses, no traffic, just trees bending under the weight of the snow. I was maybe 20 kilometers from the next town when the engine sputtered once, twice, and then died completely. The lights dimmed, the heater stopped, and the silence that followed was heavy enough to make me aware of my own breath. I tried restarting it. Nothing. Just the click of a dead starter and the faint groan of the wind outside. For a while I sat there, trying to think of what to do. The snow was building up fast around the tires. My coat wasn't made for this kind of cold, but staying inside the car meant freezing in place before morning. Then, in the side mirror, I saw it. A light, distant but steady. Maybe a house, maybe a small cabin. Couldn't have been more than a few hundred meters away, down a slope off the main road. I grabbed my flashlight, zipped my jacket to the top, and stepped out. The wind hit me like a wall. My boots sank ankle-deep in snow with every step. There was no sound, except the hiss of the storm and the occasional crack of a branch under ice. The light flickered through the trees, pale and yellow, warm, like a window lamp. It took longer than I expected to reach it. When I finally did, I found a small wooden cabin half buried in snow. Smoke curled from a metal chimney, thin but steady. Someone was definitely inside. The front door had a lantern hanging above it, swaying slightly in the wind. I knocked hard. Then again. Hello? My car broke down up the road. I just need to warm up for a bit. No response, only the wind scraping against the walls. I tried knocking again. Someone had moved inside, or maybe a shadow had passed in front of the fire. I called out once more, raising my voice this time. Still nothing. The cold was cutting through my clothes now, so I tried the handle. The door pushed open easily. The air inside was warmer, carrying the dry, smoky scent of burning wood. A cast-iron stove stood near the wall, with embers still glowing inside. There were 2 wooden chairs, a small table with a metal cup, and a half-empty bottle of water beside it. A heavy jacket hung from a hook near the door. It wasn't a place someone had abandoned long ago. Whoever stayed here might have just stepped out. I shut the door behind me, rubbing my hands near the stove. The warmth hurt at first, but it was a good kind of pain. I called out again, quieter now. I'll just stay here until morning, okay? Silence. After a few minutes, I looked around. There was a small cot in the corner, blanket folded neatly. A pair of boots stood underneath it, large, heavy, with dried mud frozen along the soles. On the windowsill sat a hunting knife, blade slightly rusted, and a set of keys with a small metal tag that said, Rangers Post Number 7. Maybe this was some kind of park ranger's cabin. That would make sense. I found a notepad and a pencil on the table. I figured I'd write a short note explaining that I came in because of the storm, just in case the owner showed up later. But before I could start, I heard something outside. A dull thump, like a car door closing. I turned off my flashlight and moved to the window. Through the swirling snow, I saw headlights pointing straight at the cabin from the road. A truck. dark-colored, maybe green or black, hard to tell through the storm. The engine kept running for a few seconds, then went quiet. A man got out. He wasn't dressed like a ranger. No uniform, no bright jacket. He wore a dark coat, hood pulled low, and gloves that looked too thin for this weather. He walked around to the back of the truck and opened the cargo door. I could barely see, but it looked like he was dragging something. A large plastic tarp, maybe a bag. He pulled it out slowly, leaving a dark trail against the snow. He stopped halfway to the cabin and looked around, his head turning sharply toward the trees, then toward the door. He didn't call out. He just stood there for a moment, motionless, before picking the tarp back up and heading around the side of the house. I stepped back from the window, pulse thudding in my ears. Maybe he was a hunter. Maybe it was game in that tarp. But the way he moved, quiet, like he didn't want to be seen, made my stomach tighten. Then the truck's lights went out completely. I didn't know what to do. If I stayed inside, he might come in and find me here, thinking I broke in. If I ran out the front door, I'd cross right in front of him. There was a small back door next to the stove. I decided to check if it opened. It did, but the snow outside had piled up against it, making it almost impossible to push through without making noise. I turned back toward the main room just as the front doorknob started to turn. It clicked once, slowly, like someone testing if it was locked. Then came a quiet knock. Not loud, not polite either. Just a dull, steady tapping, 5 times, then silence. I stayed still, not even breathing. Another sound followed, a faint shuffle near the window. He was circling the cabin. I could hear the crunch of his boots moving from one side to the other. Then nothing. Complete silence again. I waited what felt like several minutes before I dared to move. I peeked through a narrow gap in the curtain. The truck was still there. The man was gone. I put on my gloves and zipped up my coat. I wasn't staying another minute. I opened the back door carefully, pushing against the snow until there was enough space to slip through. The cold bit at my face, but I didn't care. I made my way behind the cabin, keeping low. The snow muffled my steps. When I reached the edge of the trees, I looked back once. The cabin door was open now, just slightly, swinging in the wind. I didn't see the man, but I could feel it. He was still nearby. I moved faster, stumbling through the snow toward the road. The slope felt endless, my legs burning from the cold. When I finally saw my car again, it looked half buried, the windshield covered in frost. I jumped in, hit the starter, and it coughed to life on the second try. As the engine warmed, I turned on the headlights. In their beam, for just a second, something flashed at the tree line, a reflection of metal, maybe from the man's truck or something he was holding. Then it vanished. I shifted into drive and got out of there. The snow kept falling harder as I descended the mountain. My hand stayed tight on the wheel the entire way, eyes fixed on the road. After maybe 15 minutes, I saw a wooden sign on the right side that said, "Ranger Station, closed for the season." Below it, nailed to the post, was a small, rusted tag that read, "Post number 7." I didn't stop. By the time I reached the main road, my phone had signal again. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That I broke into a cabin, saw a man with a tarp, and ran off. I drove the rest of the way in silence. When I finally parked at a motel outside the next town, I noticed something that made my chest tighten again. On the floor of the passenger side, half covered in melting snow from my boots, was a small metal tag, one that must have fallen from my jacket or maybe from the cabin. It said, Rangers Post number 7. I was heading back from visiting my uncle that night, a quiet trip I'd been putting off for weeks. He lived just far enough outside the city that the return always felt longer than it should. By the time I left his place, the snow had picked up again, thick flakes spinning in every direction. Streetlights turned everything pale gray. The station sat at the bottom of a long flight of stairs coated in frost. A single advertisement flickered above the turnstile. I checked the display board. Last train, 8 minutes. It was close to midnight. There were only 2 other people on the platform. One stood near a bench, middle-aged, tidy, scrolling through a phone. The other leaned against a vending machine, tapping one boot against the floor, restless. He couldn't have been much older than me. Dark jacket, cap pulled low, eyes moving more than necessary. When the train arrived, all 3 of us stepped into the same car. The door sealed with a soft hiss, and the noise from the street vanished completely. I sat halfway down by the window. The man with the phone took a seat across the aisle, and the younger one stayed toward the back. The ride started in silence. Outside, the city was reduced to passing shapes of light. The heater hummed faintly. The older man typed with both thumbs, screen glowing on his face. The younger one kept shifting positions, looking out, stretching his legs, watching the reflection of the other man in the glass. Something about him didn't fit the calm rhythm of the train. 2 stops went by without anyone getting on. The snow outside blurred into a white tunnel, swallowing the sound of the rails. I remember thinking how unusually quiet it was for that line. At the 3rd stop, everything happened at once. The younger man stood, walked casually toward the older one, paused for less than a second, then reached down and yanked the phone from his hands. The motion was so quick, it took my mind a beat to process it. The thief ran straight for the rear door, pulled the emergency release, and slipped out before the train had even stopped. A rush of cold air filled the car, followed by silence so sharp it almost rang. The victim didn't move. He just stared at the empty seat across from him. When the doors closed again, he pressed the emergency intercom, mumbled something to the operator, and stayed seated until the next station. I didn't say a word. Nobody did. I got off 1 stop later. The platform was deserted. The snow had piled up against the glass doors of the exit, and my reflection looked pale under the fluorescent light. The event kept replaying in my head, the precision of it, how fast it was, how easily it could have been anyone. 3 evenings later, I left work later than usual. The snow had returned, lighter this time, falling in long, slow strands that looked frozen midair. I took a shortcut along the side street that ran parallel to the tracks. It was narrow, dimly lit, lined with closed shops and vending kiosks covered in frost. That's where I saw him. He was standing under a streetlight in front of a shuttered kiosk, shoulders hunched, holding something small that caught the light each time he turned it in his hand. It took me a second to recognize him. The same face from the train, same restless stance. When he noticed me, he smiled, almost friendly, and lifted the object. It was a phone. "Good deal, man," he said. $100, no scratches. The tone was easy, like it was nothing but business. I stopped a few feet away. The case was familiar. Same color, same faded sticker near the camera. That's when it clicked what I was seeing. It was the stolen phone. He didn't remember me. I shook my head slightly and kept walking. The sound of my boots on the snow was too loud. He followed a few steps behind. 80 then, he said. I didn't answer. He came up beside me. "I'll take 50. His voice had lost its friendliness. It sounded practiced now. I told him I didn't want it and moved to step past. He shifted sideways, blocking the path. "Just take it." The street behind me was empty. The glow from the nearest sign flickered and went out. His breath came out in short bursts that vanished in the cold. He wasn't angry yet, just focused, like he'd already decided how this would go. I could feel my pulse in my ears, loud against the quiet of the street. The snow made everything slower. There was nowhere to run without turning my back to him. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Look, I don't got all night." Before I could move, a soft blue light swept across the buildings. A patrol car turning the corner. The thief noticed it the same moment I did. His posture changed instantly. I raised a hand and called out, my voice cracking in the air. He turned and bolted. The police car stopped halfway down the block, doors flying open. One of the officers ran after him, boots sliding on the thin layer of ice. The other stayed by the car, radio in hand. The chase lasted less than 30 seconds. They caught him near the next intersection, pushed him against the side of a dumpster, and cuffed him there. I walked toward them, still trying to steady my breathing. The phone had dropped into the snow halfway between us. Its screen was cracked in a new place now, glowing faintly through the flakes. An officer asked what had happened. I told him everything. Starting with the theft on the train, I explained how I'd recognized the man, how he tried to sell me what was obviously the same phone. The officer listened without interrupting, pen moving quickly on a small notepad. The thief stood against the car, expression flat, eyes unfocused, as if none of it involved him. When I finished, the officer nodded once. The younger one retrieved the phone from the snow, examined it under the light, then sealed it in a small evidence bag. I asked if it would go back to the owner. He said it probably would once the paperwork was done. They placed the man in the back of the car. As the door closed, he finally looked at me. No recognition, no anger, just blank indifference. The look of someone who didn't register faces anymore. The car drove off, leaving tire marks on the white pavement. I stood there until the sound faded. The walk home was long and silent. Every step crunched louder than it should have. The streetlights gave the snow a dull orange tint. I replayed the scene over and over. The movement on the train, the way he'd smiled under the streetlight, how easily two completely different moments had folded into each other. When I reached my building, the hallway lights flickered as I went up. Inside, the apartment was warm but still. I set down my keys, made coffee out of habit, and sat near the window overlooking the tracks. Far in the distance, a train passed, headlights cutting a faint tunnel through the snow. It moved slower than usual, as if dragging the night behind it. I thought about the man from the train, the one who lost his phone. He'd probably replaced it by now. Moved on, told the story once or twice before forgetting the details. I wondered if he'd ever hear what happened, if the phone would ever make its way back to him. The more I thought about it, the less the theft itself mattered. What stayed was the repetition, the same face reappearing in a different context, like the city had folded just enough to bring two random lives together again. I finished the coffee and kept watching the tracks. Another train came, closer this time, lights flashing against the windows before vanishing behind a cluster of warehouses. For a while, I stayed there, listening to the faint hum of rails under the snow, half expecting another one to pass. But none did. Only the wind filled the silence, dragging across the frozen rooftops, erasing every sound that had come before it. The storm came in faster than the forecast said it would. Snow fell in sheets that blurred the road into one endless stretch of gray. I'd been driving since evening, following the same two-lane highway that cut through the forest, trying to reach the next town before the temperature dropped any lower. There were no houses out there, no gas stations, just power lines buried under ice and signs half covered in frost. The clock on the dash said 12:47 a.m. I hadn't passed another car for almost an hour when the faint flash of hazard lights appeared ahead, orange pulses through the snow. I slowed down, thinking it might be someone stuck or an accident. The outline of a pickup emerged from the white haze, angled toward the ditch. Its driver's door was open, a figure standing beside it. He raised one arm when he saw my headlights. I rolled to a stop and lowered the window just enough for the wind to slice through. He said his truck had died and asked if I had jumper cables. His tone was even, not desperate. I told him I did and pulled off the road. The cold hit hard the moment I stepped out. The man was taller than me, built heavy, maybe in his 40s. Hood up, face half hidden, no gloves. We attached the cables in silence. His movements were fast, almost rehearsed. He never met my eyes, not even once. The inside of his truck was a mess. Empty bottles, a stained tarp rolled tight in the back, rope wound around it. He caught me looking and said it was hunting gear. The explanation didn't match the smell. Sharp, chemical, something like fuel. The engine refused to start. He slammed the hood, the sound echoing across the empty trees. I told him maybe the battery was dead for good. He nodded once, then asked where I was headed. I said east. He asked if I'd seen any other cars. I hadn't. He mentioned, almost casually, that a white sedan had been following him earlier. Claimed it disappeared after the gas station, but he still felt watched. His voice didn't carry fear, just an odd focus, like he was studying my reaction. I tried to keep mine neutral. He went to the back of the truck again and adjusted the tarp. Ice cracked where it had frozen against the metal. The smell grew stronger. He closed the tailgate with more force than needed and turned toward my car. That was when I realized he'd started positioning himself between me and the driver's side door. He asked if I could take him a few miles down the road. His tone made it sound less like a question. I told him I was nearly out of gas myself and needed to keep moving. He didn't step aside. The snow kept building around our boots, the storm thickening until the sound of wind filled every pause. He said softly, "You shouldn't stay parked out here." It wasn't advice. His right hand slid into his coat pocket and stayed there. A faint metal edge pressed against the fabric. I couldn't tell if it was a wrench or something worse. I told him to keep the cables, that I had to go. He didn't move. I walked backward until I reached my door. He turned his head just enough for the light to catch his face. Then he said, "Don't bother calling anyone. Phones don't work past the bridge." I got inside, locked the doors, started the car. The tire spun once on the ice before catching. He stepped aside, covering his face from the glare of my headlights. I pulled away, cable snapping free, and kept my foot on the gas until his figure disappeared in the mirror. 5 minutes later, I noticed headlights appear behind me. Small and distant at first, then gaining fast. The road ahead curved along a frozen river. Guardrails lined both sides, leaving no shoulder to pull onto. The lights grew brighter until I recognized their pattern. The same pickup. It followed close, too close. Every time I slowed, it matched me. When I sped up, it did the same. I couldn't see the driver through the glare, only the front grille vibrating in my mirror. The storm muffled everything except the steady hum of both engines. The next sign said, bridge 2 kilometers. I kept one hand on the wheel and one on the gear shift, pulse hammering. The road narrowed as the bridge came into view, the rails on each side coated with snow and ice. The pickup shifted left, pulling alongside me. For several seconds, we drove parallel, both vehicles sliding slightly, as the tires struggled for grip. His window rolled down halfway. A hand rested on the door, holding something metal, thin, angled, maybe a crowbar. I cut the wheel hard right. The car skidded, but stayed upright. The truck veered across the lane, fishtailed once, and spun out of sight. I didn't look back. I just kept driving until the snow turned to slush and the glow of streetlights appeared in the distance. By the time I reached the next town, it was past 2. My phone lit up with signal bars again. I stopped at a gas station and went inside. The cashier stared at me like I'd just come from the moon. I told him there was a wreck on the highway, and he called it in. A sheriff's deputy arrived maybe 20 minutes later. He took down my story, every detail. When I described the truck, he looked at me for a long moment before saying they'd been looking for a vehicle matching that description. The owner, a local contractor, had gone missing earlier that week. They'd found his burned truck the morning before, north of where I'd been. The deputy asked me to stay in town until daylight, in case they needed more information. I nodded, thanked him, and left. Outside, the snow had eased into a light drizzle. I walked around my car before getting in. The headlights caught a dark streak running down the bumper, thick and greasy. It smelled faintly of gasoline mixed with something chemical. I wiped it off with a paper towel and tossed it in the bin. Inside, the heater blew warm air against my face. I sat there for a minute, letting the tension drain away. When I glanced toward the passenger seat, I saw a small metal clamp lying beside the glove box, the kind used to tighten battery cables. I hadn't brought it with me. The car idled quietly as the last flakes hit the windshield. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, waiting for the feeling that I was finally alone again.